Global miner Anglo American withheld a dividend tax for the dividend that was declared on the 17th of February. The 30th of March was, however, the cutoff date for companies to declare dividends without being impacted by the 15% tax. There's quite a bit of confusion that has come to the fore. We've also been looking at other companies which declared dividends before the 30th of the March deadline, Sasol, ELB being two of those companies, but of course paying out that dividend after April the 1st. So we have a tax expert with us on the desk, Zweli Mabhoza, head of tax at SizweNtsaluba Gobodo, and Vasilis Gerasis, trader at BP Bernstein, to delve into the story a lot more, because it seems that there's quite a bit of confusion. I think, Zweli, let's start off with you. From a tax perspective, we know that during the most recent budget, Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan spoke of a 15% dividend tax as opposed to the 10% that was, previously done. And of course, that was status quo. Things have changed dramatically. Tell us what exactly is happening and why there is just so much confusion around this story.
Well, I think if you go back when the dividend tax was proposed in 2007, which was going to replace STC, what was agreed upon was that, or what was proposed by the then Minister of Finance, which was Trevor Manuel, was that the dividend tax is going to come and replace STC. Yeah. And when it replaces STC, it was going to continue at the same rate as the rate that was used for STC purposes. But some of the things that have transpired after that, it became clearer that was going to erode the tax system in a way, in the sense that the dividend tax is only paid by individuals and by foreign shareholders, whereas STC is paid by almost everybody. Absolutely. Who is declaring a dividend, unless those dividends are within a group of companies. But then what has happened is that in the budget speech, after the law was signed that says the dividend tax will be at 10%, the minister proposed that the dividend tax will be now at 15%. Yeah. Currently, that is not the law. It's not the law. It hasn't been signed into law as yet. But some companies are actually taking or withholding 15% dividend tax. And what's interesting, when we're looking at Anglo American as an example, because they announced, they declared a dividend in February. The cutoff, the last day traded for the dividend tax was, the dividend for Anglo American was the 23rd of March. Cutoff was 30th of April. I know we're sounding very confusing because we have so many dates that we have to look at, but that is actually how it came to the fore, Vasily, and this is why there's a lot of concern about whether to withhold the dividend tax or not. What is your sense on this? Right.
First, Eleni, let me just say that I don't think we are here to specifically point fingers at Anglos at this stage. I'm pretty sure that there are other companies out there that might or might not have got it wrong. It's just purely a case of we need to have some clarity. What, in terms of SARS, what is the relevant date to take into effect? I mean, are we talking about the last day to trade to qualify for the dividend withholding tax, or is it the actual payment date?
Or the date declared, obviously.
Or the date declared. The thing is that, it was proposed that as of 1st of April, and understanding is that any dividends that are declared after the 1st of April, that those dividends will be liable for dividend withholding tax. So anything theoretically that is on the last day to trade, in this case on the 23rd of March, shouldn't theoretically be, or shouldn't, the dividend withholding tax should not have come into play.
So, Zweli, perhaps you could give a bit of insight into this. We know that Sasol and ELB declared dividends before the 30 March deadline. Last day traded was even into the month of April. They didn't withhold a 15% dividend tax. So, I mean, what is the right thing to do? I know that it's not even signed into law, so, there is still a lot of confusion, and it's really evident in the way that companies are operating right now with this dividend tax.
I think what should have happened, because subsequent to this budget speech, there were technical amendments that were done by National Treasury, again, not signed, okay? And in terms of those technical amendments, what they said, when you have listed companies, the listed companies, they are going to have the date on which you should take into account when you look at the dividend tax. It will be the date of payment. But what is even more critical is that now, as I said, the dividend tax is replacing STC. Yeah. Okay. If it's replacing STC, STC was working on the basis of declaration. Okay. So the STC only died after March 2012. So if you have a declaration that is before then, okay, then it's still governed by the STC rules. So in this case, if the declaration is done by a listed company before 31st of March, it should still be governed by STC rules. It should still be subject to STC. And one of the provisions that they've made is that you cannot be subject on the same dividend to STC and also be subject to dividend tax.
So if I may ask you a question now, what does this imply going forward? I mean, I as a shareholder now, does this insinuate that I can actually go and claim back the 5% that was taken from me?
Well, at this stage, we're going to be able to answer that when the law is signed in November, possible, or December this year, by the state president. Because all these proposals, starting from the budget speech up to now, those proposals are going to be signed into law, I think, towards the end of this year. Now, the question is, when those proposals are signed into law at the end of this year, are they going to be backdated?
Yeah.
Okay? And that is against the fundamental principle of tax, that you don't backdate law.
So theoretically, we'd actually have to see a reimbursement for the companies that actually are withholding the 5% extra.
Well, provided they don't backdate the law. If they backdate the law, you're not going to get any refund. But if they decide to say, look, they should not backdate the law, in that case, you should get a refund.
Okay, Vasily, from a investor perspective, trading perspective, how did this actually come to light? I'm sure it must have been quite a shock. And this is not the only company that has actually withheld the 15% dividend tax.
Sure. Look, I just think that Anglo American happens to be one of the darling stocks of the company and has just drawn the most attention. From our side, again, it's just, clients might phone through and say, look, I got the corporate circular, for example, from the JSE, and it did not anywhere state that there was going to be a dividend withholding tax on the dividend. So, and
a SENS announcement on the 12th of April actually announced that a withholding tax would
yes.
then, they would withhold a 15% dividend tax.
Yes, it did.
So that was also a surprise because that was way after the deadline, and of course not even in the space of between the declaration and then the last day traded.
Correct, and this is the whole issue. And I just think that they could have been more clear about it. That maybe say that, look, there is a legislation or legislative problem that we're looking at over here. Should the dividend be declared before the 1st of April, that you might or might not be liable depending on what decision we take down the line. I just think it's a little bit unfair that, as a shareholder, you trade the share on the last day to trade, in order to get the dividend, and then a week after, or 2 weeks after, you get told that, oh, by the way, it's not going to be 10%, it's not going to be 15%.
So what can shareholders do, Zweli, at this point in time, and what should big companies be doing? Because I sense that there's a bit of confusion in, amongst everyone, as opposed to just, just being the companies being slightly confused. I'm sure that this is just about compliance and ensuring that they do the right thing, isn't it?
I think at this stage it's very important for companies to just get clarity on national treasury.
Yeah.
And if this is not going to change, just to say, look, going forward, how are we going to be legislating changes? Because if this is going to be the norm, it is going to create uncertainty, okay? So it's very important to just understand, to say, look, how are we going to deal with this thing? Because it's not just the companies that have got an obligation to withhold tax that are going to have a problem. You have shareholders, you've got foreign shareholders.
How many people have been calling you and complaining about this story?
Well, at this stage, I've not received any call from anybody in this particular, on this particular matter. But what is happening is that there's just so much confusion around the dividend tax because it's still new as a starting point. It's expected to have some teething problems. But I think the biggest challenge is also the admin that comes with this. Because one of the things that is also, that has to be done is that if, for example, some of these shareholders, they should actually pay tax at a less rate because of the double taxation agreement, they have to write a letter to the companies where they've invested to provide that, to say, in terms of the following provisions, I should be paying tax not at 15%, but at 7% because of double taxation agreements.
Okay, very quickly, Vasily, 1% cost to buy back shares, Anglo shares, if you've got that dividend.
This was something that was also announced on the SENS announcement. They had it right at the end that there would be a 1% brokerage cost to buy back the shares. They also refer, Anglo American, that is, refers back to the March 2005 circular in relation to the drip offer. I don't think this 1% is new. I think what the SENS implies is that that circular actually implies it's not new. Yeah. I simply feel that shareholders may possibly not made aware of the 1% charge. Why now? I suppose it's just simply a case of, look guys, now you're pulling out your calculators, doing your new maths. don't forget to take this into account.
Absolutely. James, thank you so very much for joining us and adding a bit of clarity to quite a complex topic. Much appreciated for your time. That was Zweli Mabhoza, Head of Tax at SizweNtsaluba Gobodo, and Vasilis Gerasis, trader at BP Bernstein.